Hello everyone, welcome to another Patreon voted review where the patrons select the game, and this month's selection is an interesting change of pace because rather than being a traditional shmup, today we are talking about a twin stick shooter, Nex Machina to be specific. Now this game came out quite a few years ago, and I actually do remember when it came out, and I'm gonna be a little bit honest here, I'm gonna be straightforward. Based on the footage of the gameplay when it came out at the time, I completely dismissed the game as another sort of crappy wannabe Euro shmupper type game. I thought, it looks kind of stupid. It looks gross. I don't want to play this game. So I never played it. I never thought about it. I just kind of wrote it off, and that was that. But thanks to the patrons, I'm taking a look at it. And I'm really glad they suggested it because I was very pleasantly surprised with what this game actually has to offer. So a little bit of background on my thoughts on the genre of the twin stick shooter. In theory, I've always been a fan of the idea of the twin stick shooter because it's this sort of middle ground between the full-on 3D of FPS, which is an incredibly popular genre, and then the 2D stylings of shmups that we all know and love, but is a very niche genre. And fully enough, the twin stick shooter genre is in between, not only mechanically, but popularity-wise. Twin stick shooters are more profitable, they're more marketable. People like twin stick shooters more than they like shmups, at least sales-wise. And so if you're making an action game, a twin stick shooter is a pretty viable option to do it. However, I've always been a bit ambivalent towards this genre, not because I think it's implicitly bad or anything, but because I've always felt like the way people approach twin stick shooters is, let's make it kind of an action game, but let's throw in all these dumbass RPG elements or rogue elements or whatever. So the most popular twin stick shooters that I've played, that my friends recommend I play, like Enter the Gungeon or The Binding of Isaac, all those types of games, I've never liked them. I think they have pretty underwhelming design, pretty underwhelming level design, especially Enter the Gungeon, which has randomly generated levels that can be pretty fun or a complete slog. So I've never really connected with the twin stick shooter genre all that much, and so I was very pleasantly surprised what this game has to offer, because even though it still has a lot of Euro shmuppy type elements, it feels like the team behind this, the developer behind this, has a pulse on actual shmup and arcade game design, and it's just so close to being what I would consider a traditional arcade style design. It is so close to that. It kind of clings on to those Western development ideas, but they are so much more minimized than what you normally see in twin stick shooters, and I think for the better. Let me get into specifics. So first of all, the mark of the Euro shmup is all about power-ups and having low-powered main state. So basically, when you're in your default state, you have a little pea shooter that does absolutely nothing, that you get rammed over by the enemies. This is Euro shmup design we're talking about. But with proper power-ups and you use your consumables and everything, then you can actually play the game and fight. And so most of the game design and gameplay is all balanced around power-ups, getting power-ups, using them, being tactical with them as far as saving resources, all that sort of stuff. Enter the Gungeon does this, where you get guns and they have very limited ammo counts and all that kind of crap. Well, I've never really enjoyed that style of game design because it's always felt to me, okay, so you just want to turn off the fun. That's basically, you design at peak performance some fun, but you only get slivers of it, and the rest of the time you're making me play this watered down, boring, lame-ass game that I have to sludge through just because you feel like that's a way to justify your mechanics and gives your mechanics some sort of purpose, progression, all that crap. Not a fan of any of it. So as soon as I start getting hints of it when I'm playing, I lose interest pretty quickly. What's really cool about Nex Machina, and why I feel like I still think it's Euro shmup, but it's the best Euro shmup I've ever played because it's so close to just going all the way. It is so damn close to doing that because you have power-ups, right? But the power-ups are forever. So once you get them, you can just carry them forward. And so a lot of the times you don't have to worry, oh, do I have my power-up? How much ammo do I have left? All that crap. The game doesn't make you play that game. It just gives you the gun, and the gun works until you're dead. So great design decision there. and then it gives you a secondary weapon. When I go into a control config and I see secondary weapon, my eyes start to spin. I start to go, great. Secondary fucking weapon. We know what this game is. It's a Euro shmup. So I went into the control config. First thing, I started configuring my controls. Secondary weapon. I'm like, oh, this is going to be a nightmare. Why did the patrons do this to me? So then I go in and start playing. And then I realize, no, the secondary weapon is actually a secondary weapon in that it just works. So you pick it up and you use it. And it's not this finite thing where you use it 4 times, and then you have to go run and grab bullets or whatever crap. No, it's like a real secondary weapon that you can use tactically somewhat, but you can also just fire and spam the shit out of. So I really liked that. And then basically the way the game does the weapon system is you can swap out the weapons. I think the idea is that the weapons are pretty balanced, and it's just kind of whatever weapon you want to use in what situation. Now, rarely is that actually the case. You know, usually one weapon seems to be hella OP, and the other weapon, some of the other ones are just crappy. Like the sword, I think in this game's a little weak. But you can tell that the devs, I think this was the idea of the devs. And so as you're going through and you're picking up secondary weapons, you can just use them rather than, again, the Euro shmup design of, we're going to give you all these secondary weapons, but 80% of them absolutely suck intentionally, and you don't want them. Or if you want them, you're like, okay. But you actually want the better weapon. So I liked, again, they're making these smart design decisions where they're like, okay, we're going to have secondary weapons, but they're going to be pretty across the board. So it's going to be more about sort of play style and the level design rather than making you do this dumbass progression system like Enter the Gungeon does, okay? So I thought, okay, that's really smart design. And then when you see footage of the game, as you'll see in this video, obviously, the game kind of looks shitty when you see footage. I'm sorry to say that, but I'm not a real fan of this graphical style, and that is partly my own personal tastes. I don't like anything that reminds me of generic mobile game. Anything that even sniffs close to that, I immediately am turned off. Then also anything that reminds me a little bit of like Pixar or Disney, any of that sort of graphical design, I'm like, I don't like that either. So visually, the game is well made. I'm not saying that it's not well made visually, but it's an aesthetic I strongly dislike. And then you'll see footage of the gameplay, and you'll see the character constantly jumping and like dashing around between these areas. And I thought, oh my god, is this some kind of stupid semi-open world type thing where you run around and there's little teleport pads? I think Enter the Gungeon has some of this as well. I don't like that game if that's not obvious. And you like teleport to different places and different rooms, and oh, you have to kind of learn which teleport goes to where, like that gym in Pokemon. Everything visually this game is presenting to me from the footage was a huge turnoff. I thought this was going to be semi-open world, learn where the hidden items are, sort of Metroid-ish. Actually, no. So the way it works is it has these little bite-sized levels, these little mini levels, and you go in there and you fight in them. They're like little arenas, and you try and race against the clock to save the people. I like that level design, the way they design it to give you motivation, to make you move forward rather than just letting you sort of exploit the weaknesses in the game design. At least they're trying to make you engage. So I really like the hostage system. And then once you kill sort of this specific ending enemy that always spawns, or one of these bigger ending enemies, it just auto jumps you to the next mini stage. And so that jumping animation that you're seeing is an automatic cutscene type thing. Now, personally, I think over long play sessions, because I played this game for like 5 hours for this review or something like that, I think that animation gets a little wearing at times. I wish it was faster. You just psh, 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 psh. And I think it would give the game more pace if that animation was faster as well. But I like the idea. I like the idea of moving you from these little mini arenas. It gives the game a real frenetic feel, especially when you just come through, you blast through the arena in literally 60 seconds, and then bam, you're in the next arena. And they're all pretty well designed. There's some of them that I think are a little bit gimmicky and stupid. Like there's this one where there's this giant boulder that chases you. Also, what surprised me was how well done the boss fights are. Once again, the classic hallmark of the Euro shmup is underdeveloped boss fights. So the Euro shmup, typically what they want you to do is use a specific weapon, or it's like The Legend of Zelda where there's just one specific pattern that you figure out and you just repeat the pattern over and over and over, and then you're on to the next boss, right? That type of thing. Well, this game actually has multiple patterns because of the different weapon systems. There's different ways you can fight the bosses. They actually move around and are dynamic. I thought the boss fights were actually really fun. The first one is, I think, the most Euro shmuppy, where it wants you to run around the object. I'm like, oh boy, is this the kind of boss fights we're going to run into? But boss 2 onward, I think, are all really well made. So the game is doing a lot of things right, in my opinion. Some of the critiques I would have of the game is, funnily enough, it kind of is a little bit old school in some ways that I wonder if it would be better off abandoning. So when I say old school, one of the kind of classics of an old school arcade game, old school shmup, is on death, you kind of get what's called Gradius syndrome, which is that you just lose a shitload of power, and then getting recovered is a big pain in the ass. For the most part, the game avoids this issue because when you die, you drop your items and you can run and pick them up. But the developers forgot to program in something called respawn invulnerability, or the amount of respawn invulnerability they give you is comically tiny. So what often happens is you die, you respawn, you run over to get your items, and you're dead trying to run and get your items. Where you die is typically a really dangerous place, right? So you're trying to go back to it to get your items, but your respawn invulnerability is so short that you actually can't get to them in time. And then you can end up getting in these sort of death loop situations, especially on the later boss fights. As far as the overall game length and game design, I was actually really happy with the length of the game. Again, you're seeing footage of the game. You're just getting a sort of general Euro shmuppy vibe from the game, just visually. So you imagine it's one of those games where it goes on for 6 hours and it has these really long, drawn out sections just to pad out the length so that howtobeat.com or whatever gives them a longer rating. This game doesn't do that. It's all killer, no filler, no BS, no dumbass cutscenes, no weird mini stages or some crap like that. It's all just pure raw gameplay all the way through. I was very impressed. So the developer impressed me with this game. My biggest critiques of it is I think the presentation is definitely way too generic. I think if this game had a much more engaging presentation, I would have connected with it from the visuals early on rather than just ignoring it. And also, I don't think it communicates the way it plays very well from pure gameplay footage. I watched like 40 minutes of gameplay footage before starting my review and before playing it, and I thought, what is even going on here? So I think the game could communicate itself a little bit better visually. I think it could have rebalanced some of the weapons a little bit as well, because you get the charge lock weapon and you're like, hell yeah. Then you get the sword and you're like, oh shit. So I think the weapons could have been rebalanced, buffed up. And then the other thing that I want to critique before we get to sort of the final thoughts is the dash system of the game. I think this is the game's biggest Euro shmup element, and I think probably one of its biggest weaknesses. Not because it has a dash system, but the way the game handles the dash system, I think, is a little bit disappointing. Essentially, the way the game is balanced is your movement speed is fairly slow. It's not super slow, but it's fairly slow. So a lot of popcorn enemies and bigger enemies can actually run you down. So if you're just fully running away from them, shooting them, a lot of them you can kill in time, but if you're not fully powered up, a lot of them can just run you down and kill you. And so the way the developers want you to handle this situation is not through your base movement or your base sort of power level. Instead, what they want you to do is they want you to dash around. And a lot of the level design is really balanced around using this dash, like specifically where there's lasers that come in. The dev's like, okay, you better dash through the laser. That is my biggest critique as far as the mechanics and the level design, is I think it relies a little too much on that Simon Says, dash here, run here, dash here, solve the puzzle type of a level design. Some sections are like that. Other sections are more dynamic. and really fun and get more bullet hell and they get more visceral. But there are sections of the game where it's basically a glorified quick time event where you're running, dash through it. And then the way the dash works is it's pretty solid as far as giving you good invulnerability, good movement. I'm glad that there's a power up so you can triple dash. I think that's really nice. But it also has this massive cooldown, and you also can't really cancel out of the dash either. It's very linear, it's very telegraphed. And so what that means is that I think they left a lot on the table with dashing, and maybe I should make a video about my thoughts on dash systems. But I always ask people when they talk about dash systems, why add the dash? What is the dash accomplishing exactly? Because is the dash upgrading your movement? Like if you learn how to dash and learn how to dash well, maybe like Symphony of the Night, something like that, then you unlock a level of movement that's just not possible or is really unique and fun and interesting. And there's a technical mechanical aspect of your movement system with this dash. Is that what you're accomplishing? Or like in the case of this game and most other Western made modern games, the dash is just this little bit of extra flair. It has no intrinsic value outside of the developer saying, you must dash, you must dash. And in order to justify the dash, what the developer does is nerf your other aspects of your gameplay. So your movement speed is too slow to run away from the enemies. It's just slow enough that you need to dash. Okay. It's a little bit hard to communicate, but basically it's a mechanic in search of a purpose rather than a mechanic that was born from purpose. So something like Super Metroid, the speed booster, one of the greatest mechanics in all of gaming. Another video I need to make just talking about the stupid speed booster. That speed booster solved a fundamental issue of Super Metroid, which is we got this big ass map. It's lame to just run through these rooms over and over that you've already been through. It's boring. We need to liven this up. We need to make this happen. Aha, speed booster. So they create the speed booster to solve this issue of traversing this huge map in a fun and interesting fashion. In this game, the dash doesn't work like that. It's, okay, we have this big arena, we have all these enemies coming at you. You could probably just run around them if we gave you a little bit faster movement speed, but we really want to dash. We really want this dash in the game. So what we're gonna do to justify it is we're gonna make special lasers that you have to dash through, and then we're gonna make you just slow enough that you must dash. I think that is very Western style design, and design I'm not a huge fan of. So I wish if they wanted a dash in this game, I wish they would have really worked with making it more meaningful. So instead of having this massive cooldown, making it tactical and all that, why not make it very fluid and cancelable, and you can mesh it into your movement system? And then when people watch your gameplay footage and you're doing all these sophisticated dashes and cancels and you're just maneuvering around the screen in a way that's impressive and interesting, I think that's a much more engaging mechanic rather than, well, every single person uses the dash on this section because the game says you must dash. So I think that's the game's biggest flaw. But overall, I actually had a lot of fun with it. I do think it is the best twin stick shooter I've ever played because, one, there's no inertia, thank God. You move around pretty well. Your base shot isn't amazing, but it isn't as nerfed and crappy as pretty much every other Western twin stick shooter. They're giving you something to work with, at least. And then the best parts, though, is that you can carry through the entire game your power-up. So if you get your power-up and you play well and you don't die, now you're getting a lot of more maximal, visceral gameplay out of it, rather than having to be tactical and all that crap. So I do recommend it. I think it's a lot of fun. I believe you can pick it up on Good Old Games if you want to do it that way, rather than getting it through Steam. I'm really interested to see what the developer has done since this game. This is the first game by this developer I've ever played. And maybe, you know, we could see something great in the making from them in the future. Adios, everyone. So thank you to the $5 patrons, 100, Another Joe, Anthony A, Aaron Solis, Bo, Ben, Blur Reality, Borgie22, Brian Shiver, Chris Yusufovich, Chronic Burnout 3, Clammy Coyote, Cook Some Soup, Corey Mark, Des Audio, Darren Griffin, Disco Stas Leia, DJ420 Praise It, Eric H, FCK, Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Hausu, J, Magellan6276, JLab, JBRPG, John Kelly, Gameboy Guru, K, K2, KZ, Khalil Reedy, Contain, Larridge, Malaise, Mark Toms, Matthew Derekish, Maz, Megadeth859, Minung, Macklin, Michael Stum, Mitchell Y, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, Neon Dagger Games, Oakla Kugels, Psycho Blizzard, Rattlecat, Raoul, Real Skeen, Riff Mason, Rolf015, Sarah, Scanline City, CSAFW, 7 Overdose, Shmup Junkie, Sarah Pong, Steve Fiction, The Boot Rex, The Dirty Screech, The N1, TRM Sugumo, Twilight EX, Unikoi Roots, Wabby Legs, and Utakaya. Thanks for watching.